I gotta press record. Okay. Again, welcome everyone to tonight's Sierra Club Capital Group monthly speaker session. So tonight our program will be about the future of water and sewage need, featuring Mr. Dan McLaughlin, the Senior Associate City Attorney of Raleigh, and also Mr. Kenneth Wardrop, Assistant Public Utilities Director for Raleigh. And before we start, just got a few announcements I want to make. Moving on. So for those who are new to the Sierra Club, we are oldest, largest, most effective grassroots environmental group in the United States. Missions explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. And we tackle a number of environmental issues such as climate change and water pollution, fossil fuels, renewable energy, and protecting our parks and forest lands, in which we have a quick news we want to bring on that front. So about the Capital Group, for those who are not familiar, we are one of the 12 volunteer groups in North Carolina, and we serve 11 counties in central North Carolina. So real quick, some quick update. So as many of you might know, Governor Roy Cooper has recently nominated a new Department of Environmental Quality head, Ms. Dion Delegati, and we all hope that we will have a good long working relationship with the new DEQ head moving forward. With Duke Energy, there's a public hearing about the new integrated resource plan on March 16th. We highly encourage people to sign up to speak by March 11th. You can sign up either through the email or the phone number that is mentioned here. And also, each speaker is allowed 5 minutes, so that's plenty of time to talk about your thoughts on Duke Energy's proposed integrated resource plan. And furthermore, there's some news about the Coalition and RDU-Quarry. A few weeks ago, Senator Wiley Nickel has a town hall meeting to inform people about the issue of the RDU-Quarry issue, and basically updates on what's recently been going on. And speaking of what recently is going on, the Sierra Club Capital Group has sent a joint resolution with the Coalition to call for denial of the mining permit and also the restoration on sunset clause. Now, there's a good news on that front today. We had just learned that North Carolina Division of State Parks and Recreation had just sent a letter this afternoon, also calling for explicit denial of the mining permit. So that's really good. We had just shared the link onto our Facebook through the RDU community page. So if you haven't, definitely do check out the letter. And real quick, a political update. With the municipal election that's coming up, we are calling for volunteers. We need to help out. You need to be a Sierra Club member to be involved in the political committee. We'd like to focus, we'd like to expand the focus beyond just Raleigh, Cary, Mooresville, and Wake Forest, mostly to help with questionnaires, interviews, and endorsements. So if you're interested, contact our co-chairs, Helen Todd and Patricia Reed. And then some upcoming events. So as always, our exec committee meeting for the group is on Thursday, the first Thursday of the month. The Zoom link will be posted on the meetup. And also we got a number of Zoom webinar that's hosted by other groups. So the Cary Green Citizens Coalition is going to have a webinar called It's Time to Change, a Climate Action Plan. And the Eventbrite link we will share afterwards for people who might be interested. And then following that, there's a documentary and Q&A session hosted by Tuesdays with Tillis and 350 Triangle on the issue with wood pellet industry in the southeast of United States. The documentary known as Burned Our Trees and New Coal. And the Zoom link registration is available here. We'll also be sharing that on our Meetup and our Facebook shortly. And also, if you're interested in attending any of our conservation committee meeting and be more involved, we have a conservation committee meeting on Thursday, March 11th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Yep. And the Zoom link should be available. Harvey Richmond, who's with us tonight, if you would like to find out more, you can definitely reach out to him. He's our conservation committee co-chair. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to reintroduce you to tonight's program, The Future of Water and Sewage Need, with Mr. Dan McLaughlin and Mr. Kenneth Waldrop. So with that, let me stop sharing. 1 second. Let me see. Hold on 1 second. Let me just stop sharing. Okay. All right. I'll take it away.
Dan, with your permission, I will put the presentation up.
Thanks, Kenny. Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. As Walt said in the introductions, I work in the city attorney's office, and I've been working there for 17 years on environmental issues, particularly related to water and sewer needs and the challenges that we face in Raleigh because of the nutrient issues in particular, and also because of some other laws that I'll mention to you in just a minute. Kenny, let's go to the next slide, please. There are some folks who I want to express appreciation to for contributions they've made to the PowerPoint that I'm going to provide you. One, Erica Powers, a partner with Barnes and Thornburg out of Chicago and DC and other areas on fundamentals of the Clean Water Act. Our Assistant Director, TJ Lynch of Raleigh Water, who is in charge of the sewage treatment plants complex. And he particularly has provided me some background on nutrient pollution challenges. Kenny, who will be sharing a fair amount of the program with me. And then the staff of the Division of Water Resources who provided some information I'll show you later in the program as well on the impacts of nutrients on the NEUSE River system. The first part of the program, I want to run through several statutes with you that are important to an understanding of how all of this works and impacts the city of Raleigh's public utilities operations. The first is the Clean Water Act, which has been around since 1969, 72 timeframe when the major amendments were made to the act, and the program was put in place that's called the National Point Source Discharge Elimination Program, and it results in the permits that are issued to wastewater treatment plants. The principal purposes of the statute are to protect and restore physical, biological, and chemical integrity of our nation's waters. It protected water quality initially and not water quantity, but in more recent years, water quantity has become recognized as an important part of water quality. So minimum flow during drought and other exceptional circumstances has become a more important issue in protecting particularly fish propagation. The two primary goals of the act that we'll be looking at tonight are discharges of pollutants to surface waters, and those may impact the drinkable quality of that surface water, as well as the fishable and swimmable qualities of the surface water and that attainment. The next statute I want to talk to you, just give you a little brief overview is of the NEUSE Basin itself. Of course, Raleigh is located in the NEUSE Basin. We're near the upper end of the basin. And the NEUSE Basin itself is subject to a regulatory program for reduction of chlorophyll A or nutrients caused exceedances to the water quality standard in an area called the NEUSE Estuary. The NEUSE Estuary is located near the city of Newbern down at the coast. So it starts at a location called Streets Ferry, where there once was a ferry, runs past Newbern down to about Minnesota Beach, which, if you're familiar with the area, is where the Cherry Branch Minnesota Ferry crosses the NEUSE River. That TMDL, as they're called, total maximum daily load, was adopted in 1997. Its reduction goal is a 30% reduction in total nitrogen TN, that is loading, based on the 1995 baseline. So it's been in place for more than 20 years now. TMDLs are put in place when T-bells, as they're called, another form of regulatory controls. As you'll see, of course, environmental law is littered with acronyms. And those are, when those are not enough, reduction achieving measures at wastewater treatment plants, then impaired waters are declared, and the states evaluate those and they develop a plan and a strategy for reduction of the impairment to restore the water quality. The next slide talks about the Falls Lake nutrient strategy. So not only do we have one nutrient strategy for the NEUSE Basin, we actually have two. The NEUSE estuary strategy that I spoke about a minute ago extends to include Falls Lake, but Falls Lake is the principal drinking water supply for the city of Raleigh. And in 2006, there was legislation adopted that required attention to be focused on Falls Lake and to see whether or not it had additional important nutrient impairments. And in fact, when the legislation came forward and the modeling and monitoring was finished, by 2010, the state had adopted a new nutrient water strategy for Falls Lake. It was more restringent than the NEUSE estuary imposed in Falls Lake. It regulates both total nitrogen and total phosphorus, and it had the really lofty goals of a 40% reduction in total nitrogen and a 77% reduction in total phosphorus. And actually our slide, I didn't catch that area that I made in it there. That is the goal for the whole reduction of the lake. At stage one, the reductions are at 20% and 35%, I think it is, Kenny, for total phosphorus. And so again, we're driving, and that was a goal to be achieved this year. And that goal has been generally achieved in Falls Lake through important reductions that came both from new development controls as well as wastewater treatment plant improvements. It's directed at improving and protecting the quality of Raleigh's drinking water supply. 80% of our drinking water comes from Falls Lake, and we also receive a small amount, only a small amount of the land is in the basin is in Falls Lake. The next statute I want to talk to you about is what's called the IBT statute, or the Interbasin Transfer Approval Statute. That law is a state law. It was adopted in 1992, and it limits greatly the ability to move water among and between the river basins of North Carolina. That statute actually includes a number of sub-basins. So most people think of North Carolina as having 17 river basins. Under the effects of that statute, we have 37. And so moving water even internal to one of the big basins, like the NEUSE, can require an interbasin transfer approval. And that is actually a challenge that Raleigh has to deal with, because our utility extends to include Zebulon. Zebulon's wastewater treatment plant discharges into Contentnia Creek, a major tributary of the NEUSE River that comes in down at Fort Barnwell, but that tributary is actually a separate river basin for purposes of the statute. We are also in our metropolitan area, but not the city itself, is both in the NEUSE and the Cape Fear. So when we look at what might be a natural growth of our system, for example, to bring Cary, Durham, and Raleigh all together in one major system, as happens in many other areas of the country, with the density of population that we have in a metropolitan area, it is not practical and possible under the Interbasin Transfer Statute in North Carolina for that to happen. So finally, I want to mention to you a statute that may be familiar to you, but you may think of it more often as the Environmental Impact Statement, the EIS statement. And that's NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, again, passed 69-70 time frame, and it has required for many years important disclosures of environmental impacts on projects requiring federal approvals. Those federal approvals include the permits for our wastewater treatment plant. They also include the approval for our water treatment plant. And surprisingly, perhaps to you, our water treatment plant also has a wastewater discharge treatment because the treated solids and other materials extracted from it generate wastewater. So we have to look at it from both sides of that statute, and a NEPA analysis always is necessary. And Raleigh has just undergone and finished a really important growth in our water supply, and Kenny's going to talk to you about that. And that growth is an expansion of our water supply to a level that will satisfy the needs of the city at least until 2045 with the anticipated growth. And I really wanted you to hear about this because it illustrates how long and difficult the process is to obtain a new water supply when you're sitting at the head of a river basin, as we do in Raleigh in the NEUSE River Basin. So the challenge is enormous, and Kenny's going to walk you through how that challenge was dealt with.
Thank you, Dan. What we'll do in my part of the presentation is we'll talk about one side of the utility house, the acquisition of water so we can turn it into potable drinking water and provide it to our customers. The other side of that house, of course, is collecting wastewater from our customers and treating it in an environmentally responsible manner and returning the water to the source. So a little background, your utility, Raleigh Water, serves 7 communities: Raleigh, Wake Forest, Roseville, Knightdale, Wendell, Zebulon, Garner. 600,000 individuals through 194,000 connections. Collectively, we all consume about 50 million gallons per day. To put that in perspective, we have 2,500 miles of water line, 2,500 miles of sewer line. We have enough water line to run out to Las Vegas. There's a great hotel out there, the Bellagio. Their famous fountains contain 22 million gallons of water. So collectively, we could fill those fountains more than twice, and then we have enough wastewater pipe to bring it back here and treat it. That should put in perspective the relative size of your utility. It's a $262 million a year business. Our source water, as Dan mentioned, primarily is from Falls Lake, but we also take water from the Swift Creek Lake systems of Lakes Benson and Wheeler, and collectively, the citizens of Wake County have reserved a watershed in eastern Wake County that drains to the Little River as a potential future third reservoir. So why is it important to be planning for new water resources? Well, the simple answer is we expect to continue to grow. Matter of fact, we expect our population that we serve to grow from 600,000 individuals today to more than 1 million by 2040. And as you can imagine, each of those new houses constructed need a new connection to the water system, a new connection to the wastewater system. So even with the most responsible reductions of water use through efficiency and conservation, new water resources will be necessary. We can acquire essentially around 63 million gallons of water per day from Falls Lake, treated in our E.M. Johnson water treatment plant. Our Swift Creek Lake systems yield about 11 million gallons per day. We have a treatment plant to the south, the D. Benton Water Treatment Plant, that treats water from those facilities. We'll have a shortfall, unfortunately, of about 22 million gallons without new water resources. So knowing that, when I joined the city in 2006, one of the very first assignments that was given to me as a new construction project administrator was to look at this potential third source, the Little River Reservoir. In relative size, this reservoir, if ever constructed, would be approximately the same volume as both Lakes Wheeler and Benson together. And we have been thinking about this as a collective community for 50 years now. The Little River Reservoir was identified in 1971 as a potential water resource. And for the next 36 years, our collective communities were planning, reserving property, acquiring property. Over $15 million of property were acquired through 2006. And at the end of what we call our regional utility merger timeframe, so from the year 2000 through the year 2006, 7 regional utilities merged to become one under the umbrella of the City of Raleigh Public Utilities Department, or Raleigh Water now. At the end of that window, we decided we needed to pursue aggressively our new water resource, which we thought at the time would be the Little River Reservoir. So in 2007, we started the environmental impact statement process, as Dan mentioned, which is a process outlined by the National Environmental Policy Act. And that process requires us to identify all feasible alternatives and pursue the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative, which after a 4-year time frame of intensive engineering and data research, we sat back and realized that perhaps the Little River Reservoir was not the most feasible alternative for our communities. And instead, we turned to Falls Lake once again to identify the possibility of additional water withdrawals from that water body. After a year of study, not only had we convinced ourselves, we had convinced officials with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality that this was a viable alternative. And we did have to study a large number of alternatives, over 25. I think within that 5 or 6 year period, we probably expended $5, maybe $6 million in both site studies, land preservation, and broader engineering studies to narrow this down. So it's a very long, complex, and expensive process. So Falls Lake was identified as the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative, but it's a politically fraught alternative, originally dismissed because of outstanding issues with Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, and what is colloquially known as the regional water wars of those 3 states. Those issues and those water disputes center around a reallocation. So we were initially concerned that we couldn't pursue one. After a second look, we felt like it was important to try. But if we were not successful, we also made a request with the state of North Carolina for a bridging allocation from Jordan Lake. So the Falls Lake reallocation process itself, Falls Lake has an existing storage contract. We have a certain percentage of storage from and in that lake from the Corps of Engineers. And the concept was fairly simple. That lake serves multiple purposes. It is a flood control storage project. It stores water for water quality purposes downstream. About 58% of the original conservation pool was for water use downstream. There was 42% of it, or 45,000 acre feet, was drinking water supply for the city of Raleigh, and now it's merged communities. And then there's a certain amount of storage in that lake for sediment to build up over time to make sure we have a nice long lifetime associated with that project. And what we realized was it's possible to borrow water from one of the other uses and return it to the NEUSE River after use. So it's something of an interesting reality that we as a community, we return to the river 8 gallons of out of every 10 that we use. So our true consumption is only 1 to 2 gallons out of the 10 that we might borrow. The rest is returned as wastewater. It's treated at our large regional wastewater treatment plant, and we return it for its downstream uses. So seeing this as a viable alternative, having the state agree it's a viable alternative is not the same thing as having the federal government agree it's a viable alternative. So in 2013, we approached the federal government asking for an opportunity to effectively pursue this. A couple of years of negotiation. We have a memorandum of agreement. A federal study is underway, fully funded by the city. At the same time, we're asking the state of North Carolina to consider an emergency or short-term water allocation request from Jordan Lake. These processes moved in parallel. It may seem like it takes forever to go from March 2015 to January 2017, but that's a rocket pace for managing these types of studies with the federal partners that we have. It really was one of the fastest things that they had ever done. And by December 2016, the state had agreed that we could have an emergency allocation of Jordan Lake if necessary. And by 2017, we had an agency milestone that was telling us that the Corps of Engineers agreed that this was a good idea. Having placed a notice to Congress of the Corps' intention to reallocate water to the city in this project, by November 18th, a final decision was reached. And we were able to actually surrender the EMC awarded water quality allocation from Jordan Lake. So big takeaways from that. We were able to acquire at a fraction of the cost of building a new reservoir, additional water allocation for the city, carrying us through the year 2047. The cost of constructing a new reservoir was estimated to be, a couple of years ago, over $332 million. The cost of acquiring this reallocation was $500,000 and some staff time over a approximately 5-year period, and then around $24 million in actual payment to the federal government. So you can see it's an order of magnitude difference in terms of the cost. And here is one of my last graphs to keep in mind. What has made this possible is the fact that we continue to very wisely reduce our overall consumption. This is the per capita consumption. When this conversation started in 2007, we were collectively using 117 gallons per person per day. In the 2009-10 timeframe, our council, I think very wisely, chose to implement conservation rate structures. That means tiered rates that changed water use habits and effectively continued to drive down, and continues today to drive down, the gallon per capita usage of each of our customers, which extends the life of each of our water resources. But extending the life doesn't mean it's a permanent fix. There will be a time in the future that we will need to return to water resource planning. And as a matter of fact, we probably will return in the next year or two. knowing that it will take us 10 to 20 to identify, acquire, and permit the next water resource. So I leave you with the thought that your utility plans in decades. Dan, I'll return it to you.
Thanks, Kenny. And now we're going to talk some about our wastewater treatment plants and their expansion and their needs. Here you see a map, certainly of the city and its suburbs or merger communities where we're providing services. And imposed on that, you see each of our 5 facilities that are operated by Raleigh Water. Kenny's already mentioned the EMJ plant, which is up at Falls Lake, the big water treatment plant. On the lower left, you see the Dempsey Benton plant, which is in Garner. That is our smaller treatment plant. And then on the right-hand side, you see, starting at Smith Creek in Wake Forest, a fairly small wastewater treatment plant we acquired with that merger, with that community. Next, the Little Creek wastewater treatment plant in Zebulon, we acquired with that merger, and that's also where we acquired Kenny. So it was a really useful and important merger to us. And then finally, at the bottom, you see the NEUSE River Resource Recovery Facility, which is now rated at 75 million gallons a day capacity and is making plans already to move forward to 90 million gallons a day of capacity. It is our really big workhorse of wastewater treatment. Let's talk next, briefly for you, so you'll understand a little bit more about, on the next slide, we've got some information about our sanitary sewer collection system. You'll see there some of that information that Kenny was sharing with you earlier, how big the system is. SSOs, or sanitary sewer overflows, that's a backup or an overflow, as you see in the lower left-hand corner down there, of where there's been an overflow at a wastewater sewer line. Those occur both from wet weather, but also importantly, as we show you one of our trucks that's very useful in fighting that, from the accumulation of grease and other foreign and inappropriate materials that are put in our wastewater sewer lines. So flushable wipes are not flushable. They do not disintegrate. They should not be in the sewer system. And combined with grease, they make these incredibly huge balls that block the sewer lines, make them overflow. They're one of our most important challenges in keeping the sewer line going. But our staff does a fabulous job when you look at our number of miles of sewer lines and then our number of miles, particularly of reportable SSOs. So you'll see that subcategory about halfway down, and that's 1.54 SSOs per 100 miles a year. And that is because our staff is very aggressive in its maintenance. We probably quadruple the state minimum requirements for maintenance. If we have a line that has that kind of grease problem, then we go back more frequently than the last overflow, repeatedly, and do education with the neighborhood to try and prevent those overflows from occurring. We have a reward system that we use. We pay $50 for a reward, a report of an SSO, so we can more timely get to it and fix it. Your system is operating in the top 25% of systems in the country in its success in preventing and reducing SSOs. As a part of that, they operate using an environmental management system, International Standards Organization 14001, and that is the higher standard between the two types of standards that are available for environmental management systems. Next, I want to talk to you about our challenge to compliance. And this is a little bit difficult graph because it both is showing you a long period of time and showing you some critical and important information in the center. This is the NEUSE River Resource Recovery Facility, our big plant. and it's total nitrogen discharge. And you can see back in 1995, before the stronger efforts began to control that, that we were up really high. Great implementation early on, that red line dropping, and you see our historic discharge of nitrogen coming down rapidly from 1.6 million down to about 200,000 by 2006. You see it beginning to move up, and that, of course, is we are a growing facility. And so while our staff is incredibly skilled at improving the ability to remove nitrogen from our discharge, it is impossible to remove it all. And so you're seeing also the goal against which we're driving under the TMDL that I mentioned to you, total maximum daily load. A part of that process is establishing what's called an allocation. And so the point sources were separated out as a source of loading to the estuary. The point sources, the wastewater treatment plants, and then they were given a certain amount of loading, and that was reduced by 30% based on their 1995 level of loading. And that is our, and then that was further divided among the many plants that are discharging into the river. So Raleigh got its current allocation, which with a little bit of improvement by some mergers that we had with the smaller plants, is a little over 687,000 pounds a year of total nitrogen we can release. Our operators are achieving our permit standard is that we must achieve at least a reduction to 3.5 milligrams per liter of discharge into the river. We are now achieving 1.8. It is in the highest achievement level in the nation for nitrogen removal and efficiency. And yet you can see on this graph that by 2034, we anticipate we will be out of nitrogen loading capacity to continue to expand the plant. That's the big challenge that we have in the estuary system. Let's go to our next slide. And on the next slide, I want to remind you of the whole basin. And so you can see that Durham is discharging into the basin, Cary discharges, Wilson, running down the river, Smithfield, Goldsboro, Kinston, New Bern, Havelock. So we have a lot of dischargers. In addition, there are a fair number of industrial facilities as well. And then the next slide is going to give you a little bit of information, because this is a massive program, about what those 1997 estuary rules required. So as I've mentioned earlier, it's a 30% reduction in the baseline amount of loading that occurred between 1991 and 1995. It was established as a goal without a model that would allocate to all sources of nitrogen. So it is only the point sources. The other side of that's what's referred to as non-point sources. Those are a variety of sources I'll mention to you in a minute, but they did not get a specific allocation. Getting a specific allocation is the key to control. And so the state does not have an enforceable reduction limit for those other non-point sources. And that has become a part of what has made our challenge get bigger and bigger, that I'll show you in a couple of minutes. The total loading for point sources is 1.6 million pounds per year into the estuary. There are some small point sources that are excused. And then the next area of big loading, of course, the other half of the budget is the non-point sources. And it is actually the greater part of the budget. It's about 5.8 million pounds a year is the collective amount of loading assigned to non-point sources, but not subdivided. So without that allocation, we don't know what the amount of reduction needs to be from each one of those, as there is an assigned reduction from your wastewater treatment plants. So measures that are being used, or best management practices, as they're called, or also stormwater controls that are SCM, storage and control measures that are built into certain of the developments. Unfortunately, those restrictions do not include the whole basin. So there are counties and small towns farther down the river that are not in the program for having to install stormwater control measures as they build new facilities. Riparian buffers are required in the river and have continued to be required. That was an issue in 2016. We were fearful the legislature was going to try and remove them. And Raleigh spent a fair amount of money having a study done to show the value of riparian buffers to Raleigh and its performance and reduction. MS4 permits refers to the stormwater permits. MS4 is the acronym for the stormwater permits. And again, not all local governments in the basin have a stormwater permit. In fact, counties can't have one. Under state law, counties don't own the road system. And in the federal requirements, it's the road system and the roadside ditches and the gutters and curbs that are the connectivity of the stormwater system that forces counties to have a stormwater permit. So North Carolina is only one of 3 states in the country that does not have a comprehensive program including all of its counties. And finally, there are the challenges about reductions being measured. And so a number of the stormwater measures, very few of them have any really calibrated reduction measurement management. And finally, one thing that's not on here that I wanted you also to take away tonight is stormwater measures are designed for certain levels and sizes of storms. So the major hurricane events that we have and the flooding events we have, the stormwater systems aren't designed to capture and control the nitrogen when those events occur. So again, it can become a source of loading even though it's lawful because it is beyond the design of the facilities and what they have to achieve. Let's look next at a graph that shows you what's going on and been going on in the river since 1995 up to 2017. And so you see the nitrate. Kenny has to come in and help me with these because I get them wrong every time. Down here at the bottom, you'll see the TMDL reduction level of 30%. And you'll see that that was achieved around 2003 and it has not been achieved since, even for one component of total nitrogen. Kenny, will you, TKN is another subpart of the nitrogen, the inorganics, and then the green line you see is total nitrogen. That's the combined organic and inorganic sources.
Right. So what this graph and what others are trying to share are the inorganic components, the nitrite components that you run through wastewater treatment plants. Those are steadily dropping. That's the red. But the TKN, which is a combination of ammonia and organic nitrogens, are growing. And we believe much of that TKN is actually not ammonia, but it's organic nitrogen washed off both in storm drains and stormwater runoff, and most especially in agricultural runoff. So the takeaway from this graph and others that Dan will be showing is as the nitrogen that you would expect from a wastewater treatment plant drops, nitrogen from other sources are rising to take the gap, fill the gap. Dan?
And one form of nitrogen deposit, source of nitrogen that you may not immediately think about is atmospheric deposition. And atmospheric deposition has been shown significantly in the NEUSE Basin, Cape Fear Basin to be coming from CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, but another very important source of it, and that showed up in the Falls Lake modeling that we did, is from power plant emissions, coal emissions. And the atmospheric deposition was as high as 24% of the total source of nitrogen that was impacting Falls Lake. How that gets included is when it falls on an impervious surface and runs off in the stormwater, it's counted against the local government where the impervious surface is, not against the power industry. So there's nothing in here requiring reductions by the power industry. That comes instead to the Clean Air Act provisions. And North Carolina is clearly improving those since the Clean Smokestacks legislation that implemented rules that were adopted during Governor Hunt's fourth administration when I was in the the Secretary's office as its general counsel. And something we advocated for very strongly in the legislature. And we got agreement from Duke and from Carolina Power and Light Progress Energy at that time for those reductions. And so that is coming down because of the switch from coal to other fuels, including natural gas. But it's an important source of loading throughout the basin. Again, this is another graphic showing you along the river itself. So we start up at Crabtree. These are the monitoring stations. And so you see the monitoring station at Crabtree and really good reduction in the red line. TKN, total nitrogen, still up there above 40%. I mean, TKN is above 40%, but the critical thing is that green line. So the very first box, you see the green line is below 30%. At Clayton, it improves even more. This is after it's come through the city and picked up the, and of course you can see the significant reduction that's happened for the wastewater treatment component of the nitrogen in the red box. So really strong improvements there and good achievement of the reduction. It's getting really, we're right in that range of achieving it collectively. And then Goldsboro, we're starting to creep back up. Kinston, we're creeping back up. By the time we get to Fort Barnwell, which is where Contentia Creek comes in, we're moved on up that. And then at Trent, which the Trent River comes into the NEUSE estuary itself at New Bern. So when you're going to Moorhead, the Trent River Bridge is the one you're going across. When you're going over to Pamlico County and up to Oriental, then you go across the NEUSE River Bridge at New Bern. You can see how much loading is occurring out of the Trent River, which is there's one really small couple of small wastewater treatment plants up there. I think the town of Trenton, something like 50,000 gallons a day. And you can see how large all sources are coming out of the Trent and the growth of that in those 4 years between 2013 and 2017. So Kenny, let's go to another graphic that illustrates a point I said to you earlier. And that this is the graphic we put together to show the legislature how important riparian buffers are to our achievement in Raleigh. So these are the TN or total nitrogen reductions at the Clayton gauge. And the Clayton gauge is at the Highway 42 bridge. And it really is the point at which the collective loading from the city of Raleigh and its principal merger partners have all now come into the river, and the wastewater treatment that's occurring at the NEUSE River Resource Recovery Facility is in there. And you see where we are on the green boxes, total nitrogen, and how we are achieving, where we are in achieving the 30% reduction. Again, you see a lot of fluctuation there on the blue line. And we think the blue line, as the next slide will show you, is really a pretty strong and graphic representation of what's happening from stormwater. So on this line, we've got some different colors for you at Fort Barnwell, which is a really important measuring station after Kinston. So after all of the major industrial dischargers, except International Paper at New Bern, and the big wastewater treatment plants of the cities have all been brought into the mix. And then down at the bright orange line at the bottom is the combined discharges from a group called the NEUSE River Compliance Association. And the NEUSE River Compliance Association is about 80% of the point sources. I've been the chair of it for the past 10 years. And that's our improvement line of what we're doing to improve nitrogen loading. So you can see how far we are below the 30%, the blue line, which is the line of achievement. The gray line is the load, total load of nitrogen in the river, TN total at Fort Barnwell. You can see that tracking really nicely with the yellow line up above it. And the yellow line is rainfall. So that says to us that the uncontrolled sources really are non-point sources, because you can see the fluctuation with the major storm events and the major rainfall. You can go through there and pick out hurricane events by year in looking at how major and how significant that amount of loading for non-point sources is. So then let's go, I think that's our last slide, and we can take some questions if folks have any.
Dan, we had one question. Please explain the $24 million payment to the feds for Falls Lake reallocation. And the quick answer to that is the federal government paid for the construction of the Falls Lake project back in the mid to late 70s. Raleigh purchased a certain storage capacity in that lake. And in this reallocation, Raleigh purchased more storage capacity. And that $24 million was that additional storage capacity in the lake.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you this evening.
Mm-hmm. And we'll turn it back over to you, Juan.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, no, just got another question from Ross Stevenson for, do you see it? For non-point sources of water pollution, Raleigh has mandatory engineered stormwater controls for development projects. Raleigh has developed voluntary green stormwater infrastructure measures designed to capture stormwater and related pollutants on site in a way that more closely mimics natural systems. What would be the cost and benefit of changing our voluntary GSI measures into mandatory regulations?
Well, I would share with Councilor Stevenson that I'm not, and I don't think Dan is, the right key staff to direct that question. Mr. Wayne Miles, who is our stormwater program manager, probably has a very nice presentation on that, and you may want to invite him for that conversation. I would note that in our slide, you can see clear reductions from point sources. Point sources were originally only 20% of the load anyway. And the next iteration of reductions from the NEUSE River, although it'll probably be easier to regulate point sources, true reductions will only come from some kind of direct review of these non-point sources. Stormwater is part of them. Agricultural is a very big part of them also.
Thank you for that explanation. I do have a question of my own, if you don't mind answering. I don't know if that was brought up in your presentation earlier, but going back to, I think it was the SSO, the sewage overflow, right? Has there been a study or done to determine like where does most of the I guess who is the one that contributes the most to the SSO? Is it like businesses, restaurants, or more like domestic households?
So Dan, I can answer that question also. And I would refer you actually to an excellent presentation that was given the day today to the City of Raleigh Growth and Natural Resources Council. It was provided by my peer, Mr. TJ Lynch, and Ms. Eileen Navarette, who is our capital program manager. It was a very in-depth conversation with our council around sanitary sewer overflows, the cause, primary issues, steps taken to reduce them, and then the capital investment that we've undertaken. And I could not in any way try to top the work that they did today. I would refer you to that and note that the answers to your questions are in that presentation.
Okay, thank you. Got another question from Russ Stevenson. What are the options for using abandoned quarries for drinking water storage? That's interesting.
That's actually a very viable option. So we will return to water resource planning in the next year or two. And as Councilor Stevenson probably well remembers, one of the options that we explored and that were potentially very favorable was using existing and abandoned quarries in series and in sequence to store water from the NEUSE during high flows and use them as water sources during low flows. And that's certainly in the mix. And when we do return to planning, regional planning, we need to look at that option again.
Thank you. And got a question from James Spooner. Is it possible to give incentives for green stormwater infrastructure, like reduce permit fees, reduce stormwater fee for use of GSI? Maybe give a quick overview of your thoughts on this.
It is possible, and the city actually already has a program through which that occurs. Mr. Miles and his staff can tell you more about how the program occurs, but there are rebates on the fees as opposed to reductions in the fees. I'll work with them on a legal opinion about whether or not we could do that. We were concerned because of a case in 1999 by the North Carolina Supreme Court over how utility money raised for stormwater programs could be used. And in that case, it was decided that the city of Durham had wrongly used utility money for things the other required components of its program by the federal government and the state other than infrastructure. And because they were not spelled out in the statute. And so we did an examination and had it done by an independent engineering company that established that GSI measures are more protective of water quality than traditional hardscaping stormwater control measures. And based on that opinion, our office, the city's office, attorney's office did give an opinion saying that we could use money from the stormwater fee program for those rebates. And so we have been doing that for a number of years now.
Yeah, thank you. This is just for people who might not be too familiar with some of the terminologies. You mentioned about how this is used of rebates instead of reduction. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what's the difference exactly?
It's really, some of it is a part of the process of handling fees. And so we have a uniform collection of the fees. And then once the fee is received and there is an approval of the stormwater GSI measures and a determination that they're adequate, then a partial rebate of the fee occurs, and it's designed to incent people to use the GSI measures. And Wayne Miles can also I think there may be some fast tracking that happens with the permits as well, but that's not something I'm so well versed in. You should rely on me to give you the right answer.
Yeah. Got a comment from James Spooner, other ways Raleigh can encourage GSI, I think we can do better, especially with new developments. Yeah, I think it'd be good to implement GSI in future developments here in the city for sure. Got a question here. Can you talk a little bit about Raleigh's reuse water system and the new anaerobic digester at the NEUSE resource recovery plant?
I can, briefly. Reuse water or reclaimed water is treated effluent from a wastewater treatment plant. We now call them, by the way, resource recovery facilities because we are extracting resources from them. So it's treated effluent. That's the water that is flushed or flows from our homes, goes through these plants, wastes and contaminants are removed, and instead of discharging it into the stream, we pick it up, put it in a pipe, we add additional disinfection to it, and then we send it through that pipe for a non-potable use. I believe that we have somewhere on the order of 29 or 30 miles reclaimed distribution line. It's been a while since I've looked at that number. Definitely 3 in Zebulon, since I helped design and construct that. And probably is what my memory is 21, 22 in the Raleigh region. We have some excellent staff folks who could come provide good presentations on that system. And it is part of our portfolio of complying both with our nutrient challenges and as a water resource alternative. Then the other question was around our bioenergy project. I could not do that project justice in a short conversation. It is probably at one time the most expensive project that we've ever built, the most forward-thinking project we've ever built, and it is moving us closer to energy net zero than anything that we've ever done by taking waste and cracking it open for the ammonia within it, or I'm sorry, the methane within it, and cleaning that up and pumping it as natural gas to be used in the city's bus system. Again, some fantastic presentations have been created around that we could encourage the right staff to come and provide at some time.
Thank you. That'll actually be great. But so if people want to access these presentations, where would you? How would people navigate around websites or get their hands on the files?
I'd be glad to share a PDF version of this.
Oh.
We don't have it on this particular presentation on a website,
Oh.
but we've given versions of it to council that we could probably also provide links.
That's good. Thank you. Is it all right if I ask one? I have a question about you mentioned the presentation earlier mentioned about how the NEUSE reverse issue is it doesn't like not every county is being covered or accounted for. Was that it? I was just wondering what are there what sort of steps that are currently taken that's going to try to address that issue?
Well, that is a decision for our Environmental Management Commission. It recently readopted the rules for the NEUSE Estuary, TMDL. The NEUSE River Compliance Association, which I chair, advocated for all counties to be, all local governments to be brought into the system. And the commission decided not to do that. It added some more, but it has not included them all. We see marked differences in the amount of achievement and nitrogen reduction and phosphorus reduction that's occurred in Falls Lake, where all local governments are required to have a stormwater control system and operate a permit. And instead, what we have are some local governments not included in below the dam, and we also have, and in those parts of the system, the state itself is responsible for implementing them, and it's woefully understaffed. And so we do not think a good solid program is being implemented. And we just see a lot of difference in achievement in the Falls Basin from what we see in the lower NEUSE Basin below the dam.
Out of curiosity, is there anything that maybe the community, local residents, or just regular people can do to advocate for this?
It's the Division of Water Resources, the Department of Environmental Quality has to be convinced, and then the Environmental Management Commission has to decide to include them within the program.
Yeah, I see. Are there current, is the NEUSE River issue by any chance going to be on the agency's radar in the near future, or is that something that we have to like personally brought up to get their attention on this again?
As I say, it's just finished readopting the rules for how that program operates, but there was a bill that was passed this last session that requires the division to do modeling on what are called transport factors and delivery factors. Transport factors refer to wastewater discharges by wastewater treatment plants, and delivery factors refer to the discharges from stormwater control measures and other non-point sources. And so they're to look at that and see whether or not the appropriate measures are now in place. So it is perhaps an opportunity that the model on which the NEUSE estuary rules were originally written will be looked at again after more than 20 years. But right now, the division has not moved forward with the RFP request for proposal that it has outstanding for modelers to come in and take on that task. So that is something that is scheduled to be looked at by legislative directive within the next couple of years.
Dan and I are staff members for the city. And as such, we take no stance on policy decisions, policy issues. We advise. And in doing so, we encourage you to become aware of the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission and the work that its body does, and the staff of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Well, I guess it's Department of Environmental Quality now, right? Using some of the old terminology. As your staff with the city, we will follow it, and we will be advising, and we will be providing information to your elected folks with the city.
And we definitely thank you for all the work you do up that front. And see, is there any other questions people might be posing? Okay. Well, if there isn't any questions, then I just wanted, before we close for the night, I just want to take this chance to once again thank our speakers for taking the time this evening to talk to us. Oh, there's someone who just posted something. Let me see. Yes, thanks for information. Thank you, Haley. But yes, thank you for coming in, and thanks for offering information. And if you can make the PowerPoints available for sharing, that would be very much appreciated, because I'm sure that there are many others who would like to know more about what sort of work is being done to address water pollution issues locally and statewide. So yes. Any closing thoughts from our speakers? No. All right. Then this meeting's adjourned. Thanks everyone for coming again, and have a good night.